And we continue at 1:06 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, The John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wangs in Culver City.
John, I know that Gavin Newsom is getting a lot of headlines for his podcast with all of the Republican influencers and all the MAGA people. But let me tell you, you're all missing out. The hottest new podcast out there is Pamela Price's podcast, the former Alameda County DA, because she is doing nothing but white-hot rage on how everyone blamed her for crime spikes when she says that was Sheng Tao's fault in Oakland.
Bipping. Car burglary, for those who don't know what bipping is, was not a thing in Livermore or Alameda or Albany or Union City or most parts of Alameda County outside of Oakland.
Boy, this podcast is just a way for her to settle scores.
I've been bipped several times.
She is the angriest person that has ever been recalled from an office in California.
And that's saying something. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a columnist at Cal Matters and the dean of the Sacramento Press Corps. You can get him on X at Dan Cal Matters. Dan Walters, welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by on this Friday.
Sure.
Let's start out talking about Gavin Newsom's podcast, because I know that Gavin Newsom is trying to present himself to the nation as a moderate Democrat, a consensus builder, a Bill Clinton in 1992, someone who has the ability to speak to Red America and all of those swing states that the Democrats lost in this last election that they need to win if they're ever going to go back to the White House. But in the meantime, he's still governor of California. And you look at the public reaction from Democrats to what Gavin is doing. He got killed on The View, where the ladies on The View just attacked him mercilessly, including Sunny Hostin, who is the legal commentator, really went for his jugular. You had Jane Fonda go on Fox 11 with Alex Michelson and compare him to Neville Chamberlain. And then you had multiple members of the California state legislature, particularly of the LGBT caucus, who took him to task for saying that biological men should not be allowed to play in women's sports. How is the podcast being received in Sacramento to those that you're talking to?
Well, I'd say it's being received as a little bit of a mystery. In other words, what is he up to? What's all this about? Why is he doing this? He had another podcast that he kind of gave up, and now he's got this new podcast, and he seems to want to, bring in these Republican influencers and whatnot. It's a kind of it's a mystery to a certain extent, because he keeps saying he's not interested in running for president. So what is he up to? I mean, this is the big issue. And by the way, a long column in the New York Times a day or two ago, just excoriating up one side and down the other. He's getting a big kickback from people on the left. Is he trying to position himself? Yeah, I think that's part of it. This is not the first time this kind of has risen. He kind of, over the last 6 months to a year, he's kind of been shuffling himself a little bit to the right on things like street crime and crackdown on homeless encampments and that sort of thing. So this is not just an isolated thing. This is kind of a more dramatic thing than he had done in the past, certainly, but it's not an isolated thing. He's obviously kind of slipping himself to the right, or towards the middle at any rate. You have to go back to when he was mayor of San Francisco. He was considered a conservative in San Francisco by San Francisco standards way back when. So this is not the first time he's kind of done that sort of thing. Taking a chapter out of the book of Jerry Brown, his kind of quasi-uncle, mentor, whatever, who used to famously say, you paddle on the left, you paddle on the right, and you kind of go straight down the middle. And this is a little paddling on the right that's going on with Gavin Newsom these days, maybe to set himself up to be a presidential candidate. Everybody seems to think that, at any rate. But something's going on. I mean, is the guy just going to go two more years and then go back to peddling wine? I don't think so. I think this is his new career. This podcast is his post-gubernatorial career, leading to something kind of like Jerry Brown went on the radio before to kind of get his political career going again.
What's interesting to me is that he now regards him, or I guess it's not new, this is how he's seen himself for some time, but he does not regard himself as being a Californian or a state politician. He sees himself very much as a national figure. And when he's booking conservative guests to come on to speak with him about the topics of the day, he's not booking people here in California. He's booking national figures like
it's definitely it's a bid for national imagery. But then that's not new either, because remember he did all those TV shows, talking head shows back before the election last year, doing much the same thing, building himself up kind of a national image of some kind.
But what's funny is you talk to people in the legislature, you talk to Assemblyman Gallagher, the Republican leader, for example. I asked him how much access he has to Gavin Newsom, and he said none. He said sometimes you see him at public events, but he's surrounded by security. You really don't have time to meet with him privately. And he said that is in contrast to previous governors. Jerry Brown was governor. You could go have a Starbucks with him. He would make time for you in his office. He would talk to you in the hallway if you were passing him in the hallway. You had unbelievable access to Jerry Brown when he was governor. When Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor, you can go have a cigar with him in the tent, and you could just bounce ideas off of him or tell him where you think he went wrong or give him an idea, something you think would be useful to him, and maybe he'd take it, maybe he wouldn't, but you'd get the FaceTime. And Gallagher says he has no FaceTime with Gavin Newsom, and I've spoken with other members of the legislature, including in the majority, and they don't have access to him either.
Yeah, well, I think, and that's a part of a pattern. He actually hasn't got along with the Democrats in the legislature at all during his governorship. It's always a situation in which he is trying to manipulate them into doing his bidding, usually kind of at the last minute, just before the legislative session ends or something. Then he kind of comes in and you got to do this, 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 and this. And they do resent that. They do resent it. And it's got to be, I could say he's not popular with the Democratic legislators at all for the reasons you mentioned. He's seen as kind of a imperious figure who just comes in and figures you have to do what he tells you to, but he doesn't really try to build any kind of personal rapport with the members of the legislature, in contrast with Jerry Brown and other past governors, because he's always looked at himself, I think, more as a national political figure than simply as the governor of California. And he doesn't, to his mind, it doesn't do anything for him to do that. What he wants to do is get on the talk shows, do the podcast, that sort of stuff. He sees himself as you mentioned, as a national political figure, not merely the governor of California.
Let's say that relationship with the legislature continues, where they resent him. They look at him as someone who doesn't look at them as equals, but he sees himself as being in the big leagues and sees them as playing in the minor leagues. And let's say he does paddle to the right to try to make himself a more attractive national figure for the Democratic Party. In my mind, that would potentially create more conflict between him and the very left-wing California state legislature, and that could bubble up in ways that we haven't seen so far in his final 2 years as governor. Do you see more conflict on the horizon between him and the Democrats in the state legislature?
More conflict with the Democrats in the legislature, and I would say the Democratic intelligentsia. I mean, this business about the transgender sports, I mean, that is the hottest button issue in America today. I think you would agree. And he just volunteered to take a side on it, and he got coverage up the wazoo. The New York Times, the networks, they all covered that, and that's what I think he's seeking, is that kind of publicity, that having his name out there, being a figure. he's always like this big gesture, the big thing that will get the headlines and get that coverage from the New York Times and that sort of thing. And this is, I think, very much in keeping with that. Now, however, he used to do it for things like allowing gay couples to get married when it was against the law. Now he does the same thing on the other side of the ideological system of seeing he wants to get noticed more for a more conservative sort of posture. I think we saw that, like I say, we saw that over the last year or so when he was criticizing local communities for not cleaning up the encampments, homeless encampments, when he was going on this, sending highway patrol officers into Oakland to deal with street crime. So, I mean, this is a kind of an escalation of something that's been going on for at least a year and maybe even longer.
We're speaking with Dan Walters, who you can follow on X at Dan Cal Matters. Dan, the former Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, announced that she will make a decision by the end of summer if she's going to run for governor of California. She is not someone in recent years who spent a lot of time talking about California state and local issues. She's been a national figure as the vice president, candidate for president. So we don't know what she thinks about the insurance crisis, the budget, water, those sorts of things. Do you think she's going to ultimately pull the trigger and run?
I don't know. I would say probably it's about a 50-50 deal. But she is, as you indicated, kind of vulnerable. She's never had much of a business going on in California other than being attorney general and mostly just dealing with the sort of stuff that got her publicity as attorney general that was not necessarily any bread and butter issues in California. She's never had anything to do with the daily life of California. As you say, things like insurance and highways and water and homelessness and all these issues that any governor should be dealing with. She's never been anywhere on those issues. She's never dealt with them at all. So she is kind of vulnerable in that as being kind of not exactly a carpetbagger, I guess, because she's from California, but kind of a carpetbagger in a way.
If she takes until the end of summer, which she can because she just spent over $1 billion introducing herself to the American people. She has the highest name ID, I think, that any candidate in that race would have, and she has it going into the race. She's not going to have to spend it to get her name top of mind to voters. She can wait until the end of summer. But if you are a mere mortal, if you are a statewide constitutional office holder or a member of the state legislature, whatever, and you want to run for governor, you can't take that long. You can't take forever to introduce yourself to voters. You need to start early. You need to start building a network. You need to start raising money, getting endorsements, getting out there. And if you wait until the end of summer, it might be too late for you. Did she set up a scenario that benefits the state's lieutenant governor, Eleni Kounalakis, because she is a billionaire? She comes from one of the top 10 richest families in the state of California. So if there is some kind of abbreviated race for governor, the woman or the candidate with the most money will benefit greatly?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a scenario if she winds up not running. And the two of them have been pretty close allies in the past. So that's a possibility, a kind of a stalking horse, if you will, strategy. And you're right. All these other people who would like to run for governor, people like Tony Thurmond, the superintendent of education, things like that, they've kind of got to put everything on hold. Although Katie Porter didn't put it on hold, she went in, but she's got some name ID going in, having run for the Senate before. So she's got that name ID kind of already, and she decided, I'm not going to wait. I'm going to go ahead and announce and then see what happens. So you're right. I mean, it does damage the people down the ladder, so to speak, of presidential candidate or gubernatorial candidates. And maybe that's just an unspoken effect, or is it something that people are doing on purpose? I don't know, but it does have the effect you mentioned.
You mentioned Katie Porter. She put out a video where she introduced herself to the people of California as a candidate for governor. And in that video, she talked almost exclusively about federal issues. She spent a lot of time talking about Donald Trump. She talked about abortion. She talked about climate change. She talked about democracy. She talked about all of those things. But there was nothing in that video that addressed any of the subjects that the governor would have influence over. What did you make of that decision?
Well, I think it's just because she's playing to what she considers her strength, that she has a record in Congress, and she wants to. That's her. She is a member of Congress, and that's what she's done. She and maybe even less relationship to California issues than Kamala Harris. I mean, she's never involved in California issues at all. She's always just gone to Congress and done her congressional thing. So I guess she could just say, well, that's what I do, or something like that. But you're right. I mean, California has no shortage of serious issues. The state budget is stuck with multi-billion-dollar deficits. The water situation is as muddled as ever over trying to do something about the water. The highways are, I just got a thing the other day that California has the 49th worst highway conditions of any state, only surpassed by Alaska. And so there's no shortage of California issues, but they're complicated issues. They're kind of no-win issues. They're difficult. And Gavin Newsom's not dealt with many of them very effectively. But if you do become elected governor, that's what's on your plate, starting with this budgetary situation, which grows worse by the minute. They have overspent revenues dramatically over the last few years, and they've had to paper over those deficits with all sorts of gimmicks and creative bookkeeping. I mean, for example, counting the June 2025 state payroll, counting it in July rather than June, so it falls in another fiscal year. That's the sort of gimmick they're doing. Well, the governor, whoever the governor is going to be stuck with that, because this is all not going to be resolved over the next couple of years. So you have to say, what do you want to do? Are you going to cut spending? Are you going to raise taxes? Whatever. But that's the sort of thing you're going to be confronted with if you're actually elected governor, or maybe even if you're running for governor. So if Katie Porter wants to take a serious candidate, she better start talking about some of the stuff, and Kamala Harris better start talking about stuff that she's going to run.
Do you think it would be possible to get elected governor of California just ignoring all of those subjects and just focusing on the national subjects, because California is such a deep blue state now? If you just position yourself as someone who's going to be an irritant to Donald Trump, that's good enough. It certainly worked for Gavin during the recall.
Yeah, is it enough? Probably not enough. But that it really depends on the dynamics of the primary election and the top two system. Will the top two produce two Democrats, or will it produce a Democrat and a Republican candidate? And that we saw that dynamic in the Senate race last year, where you had two Democrats going at it, and then you had a Republican, and the Republican wound up on the election because the Democrats split the vote up. And that's the sort of thing that you do. If you try to skate through, you could skate through if you're a Democratic candidate, you could skate through just on that sort of thing that you just mentioned, dealing with the being Trump's enemy or something like that. If you faced a Republican, on the other hand, if you're facing another Democrat, that's going to be a different can of worms, because you're going to have to at some point deal with the California issues, the things that really affect people day in and day out: traffic, schools, education, water supply, electric power rates, all this kind of stuff that really is kind of there. And the political establishment in California, for the most part, talks about it but does little about any of these things. And those issues are just going to become more acute with the passage of time.
Last question before you go. Right now we have an insurance crisis in California. California homeowners are being dropped right and left. Some companies aren't even selling policies anymore, new policies, to California homeowners. The insurance commissioner has been in over his skis almost since taking over that office. He's now a lame duck. Someone else will be replacing him the next time the seat comes up on the ballot in 2026. Just recently, Ricardo Lara approved a 20% increase in premiums for State Farm after he implied that he would not go ahead and do that. He said he got, in exchange for the rate hike, promises from State Farm that they would not be dropping more California homeowners as they have been here in the past. I think it's safe to say that by any honest evaluation, Ricardo Lara has been a problematic insurance commissioner. Do you think this is going to impact his ability to win another office, a higher office, maybe come back down to Los Angeles and go on the LA County Board of Supervisors? Or do you think that his performance has been so bad it's cut through the noise?
Well, I look actually a little bit differently. He's the only person trying to deal with the insurance crisis. Nobody else, everybody else punted. So, I mean, you got to cut the guy a little slack in that regard. He actually is out there trying to figure out how to keep insurers writing policies, because they don't have to do business in California. They could pull out at any time. There's no law that requires them to do it. And so he has to balance that fact with the financial thing. I mean, it's not an easy thing, but at the very least, he's given it a try. And I do give the guy credit for that. Is it the right thing to do? I don't know. He actually kind of overhauled the entire liability insurance situation in California with giving insurers an entirely new way of calculating premiums and their risk and things like that. This is a really tough job. Like I say, he can't just say, "Oh, I'm not going to give them any rate increases," and then they all leave the state and nobody has any insurance. I mean, this is a very tricky thing. And at least he's trying to do something about it, unlike the governor and the legislature who said, "Oh, you take care of it, Ricardo. We can't deal with it." So, what do you say? I mean, I'm not saying the guy's doing it all the right particular way, but how would it be done any differently by anybody else? That's the question.
Yeah, it's interesting that Gavin, for any issue that he regards as having political liability associated with it, he just gives it to someone else. He takes a pass. Yeah,
he's doing that with homelessness. He's saying, well, it's not my fault. It's the county people in the cities. They're not doing the job. It's blame shifting. He knows that these are negative issues that are not going to go away and are not going to be resolved during his governorship. So he's trying to shift the onus, the accountability for these things to someone else right along the way.
Dan Walters, columnist at Cal Matters. You can get him on X at Dan Cal Matters. Dan, thanks so much for stopping by on this Friday afternoon. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, now that we've hit the halfway point of today's show, if you want to continue listening to us after we sign off at 3, that's easy to do.
All you got to do is go to KABC.com, click on podcasts, go to the Apple Podcast app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe. You can download all the episodes. You can do a Google on the YouTube or get that handy-dandy KABC app. Search KABC AM in the Apple App Store, the Android Store. It's the easiest way to listen live to this radio station and download all the podcasts. Download Wednesday's show as we detail the strange crime connection between Shang Tao,
absolutely,
the Dongs, and Pamela Price.
She called me a crime boss.
And oh, what a tangled web it is. Well, we know that Janice Hahn is infatuated with the bus driver.
She loves him.
I love the bus driver.
And now we found out that she loves him so much, she's trying to get him $20 billion more.
In anticipation of federal budget cuts to programs like LA Metro, Janice Hahn is supporting a new bill that's going through the legislature that would put a measure on the ballot in 2026 for a $20 billion bond to bail out LA Metro and BART.
Okay, I know that when numbers get to a certain point, like, say, in the millions or billions, they kind of lose meaning. But $20 billion is a massive, massive, massive bond. Remember that bond that Gavin was campaigning up and down the state on for homeless people?
Oh, Prop 1.
Yeah, what was that, $7 billion?
Yes, this is going to be 3 times that.
Okay. And that was something we probably couldn't afford when we voted on that. And now she wants to put a $20 billion bond on the ballot to pay for her murder trains.
Well, and look at this. We would be borrowing money for decades to keep afloat a system that might be completely obsolete in 5 to 10 years.
Let me tell you, there's only one response that would be prudent from the voters. No soup for you.
Let's hear what Janice had to say at the last Metro board meeting where she is the chair.
I love the bus driver.
Last week, I joined Long Beach Mayor Rex Richardson.
Close enough. Richard Rexon.
She's so checked out.
And our Metro CEO, Stephanie Wiggins, to meet two very distinguished members of Congress who are on Congress's Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Our ranking member, Representative Rick Larsen from Washington, and our own Congress member from Long Beach, Robert Garcia.
I don't know if you could call him distinguished.
No, he's anything but.
I served on the Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure when I was in Congress for 5.5 years, and I know how important that particular committee in Congress is as it relates to the infrastructure across our country and for building transit projects nationwide.
She knows how the pork is made.
Just call her Farmer John.
And the first thing I did was I shared my concerns with the Congress members about the Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy's memo that was directing the Department of Transportation to prioritize federal funding for cities and counties with higher marriage and birth rates, a policy that seems designed to steer tax dollars away from counties like Los Angeles.
We have too many people living in sin here.
And also a priority to not fund transportation projects in jurisdictions that would mandate vaccines or masks requirements in the event of another major pandemic.
How about that? The new transportation secretary wants to defund Metro because of Barbara Ferrer.
No, thank you.
Well, they can always dump Barbara Ferrer if they want to. For whatever reason, they've chosen to go down with that ship.
Yeah.
So
That's going to have to be the question, right? Janice, is it Barbara Ferrer or money?
Yeah.
That or money?
That's an easy call for me.
So I'm concerned about that, as we all should be, because losing federal funding would seriously impact our ability to finish many of the projects that are underway.
Every single project that we build when it comes to LA Metro or the bullet train that's never going to get finished, it's all dependent on federal dollars. So if there's no federal dollars, none of this happens.
No, and don't forget, Grampy Joe used to represent Delaware in the Senate. So he would ride the Amtrak to Washington, D.C. So for whatever reason, he has a train fetish. So he would love to spend money on trains. So when Grampy Joe was there, he made it rain. But now Donald Trump is turning the spigot off.
Ones that our residents have put their fair share of tax dollars toward. So I'm really glad that we had that opportunity to meet with Representative Larsen and Representative Garcia. And I always like to emphasize with members of Congress that Los Angeles County is really a unique jurisdiction. Unlike, I would say, the majority of counties and cities across this country who pretty much just complain about higher taxes, we, on the other hand, vote to raise our own taxes.
She's unfortunately right about that.
Yeah, and she's acting like that's a good thing.
Well, look at the county. They have completely failed when it comes to solving homelessness. And the voters, the same exact ballot where they voted yes on Prop 36 and voted to dump George Gascon, they voted to double the sales tax going to help the homeless.
We need to start voting no on these things, people.
Time and time again, this jurisdiction has voted to raise their taxes for specific projects like transportation projects that they know will enhance their quality of life. So
How about this? In 2008, we had Measure R, and that was going to fund Metro, and you're definitely going to get that train from the Valley to the West Side. And then we have Measure R. In 2016, Eric Garcetti says, now you need Measure M. If you vote yes on that, we'll definitely build that train from the San Fernando Valley to the West Side. Well, now we've got 2 sales taxes that are permanently on the books and no damn train.
Well, how many times have we voted to tax ourselves to spend more money on the homeless, and the problem just keeps getting worse?
Infinite.
projects like transportation projects that they know will enhance their quality of life. So I can always think
I don't know if it would enhance my quality of life.
No.
Have
No,
you
it
noticed, since we have had Measure R in 2008, since we've had Measure M in 2016, since we've had this massive expansion of LA Metro where they built the Expo line and the Green Line and whatever the hell they're calling these things now, it hasn't actually made traffic any better anywhere.
No, it had traffic gets worse every single year regardless of what they do.
projects like transportation projects that they know will enhance their quality of life. So I can always think we should go to the front of the class in Washington, D.C. because
Actually, what it says, Janice, is that our voters are remedial.
Just like our electeds.
I love the bus driver in Washington, D.C. because we are certainly contributing a lot and bringing a lot to the table when we ask for federal dollars. So,
But of course, yes, we need Daddy Washington to pay for everything because we can't finance a project on our own. So if the spigot gets cut off in Washington, you're going to have a lot of half-built tunnels.
If they could deliver on any of their promises, you know what kind of strong-handed cards they would have?
But this is also what the real incentive is. It's not that we want to build things and build them efficiently. What we want is to have these never-ending projects that we get never-ending federal matching dollars for.
Sure. And when the project is completed, the project goes away. We can't allow that to happen.
so on
I better be careful with what I'm saying. I don't want Dave Sotero of Metro's communications department to send another strongly worded email saying how inaccurate Andy Wang is. That actually happened.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Ron writes in at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com and says, Dan Walters is so full of... Ricardo Lara isn't doing anything. He hides in his basement and screws the people of California, letting the insurance companies cancel them or raise their rates as much as they want.
I'm very kind of sketchy.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that he cut him some slack. I guess it is true that Gavin Newsom and the legislature punted to Ricardo Lara, but they punted to a man who brought a knife to a gunfight.
Ricardo Lara has given the insurance companies everything they've ever wanted and more, and they're still jacking up rates and canceling policies left and right. Great job, Ricardo.
Right now, let's go back to Janice Hahn on a $20 billion transportation bond that she's looking for.
So on that note, 2 months ago, I threw out the suggestion at one of these board meetings to have our legislative folks add a transit bond to our state legislative agenda, because I was thinking, just in case we do see less federal dollars and possibly dollars that we were counted on, why not think about floating our own in the state of California?
Let's put it on the old credit card.
Who in the world, first of all, who in the world in L.A. or San Francisco would vote for this? People who could, in theory, use these transit systems. If you're in the Central Valley, if you're in Lassen County in Northern California, if you're in Sacramento, why in the world would you vote for a bond of this size for systems that don't even work in the communities that they're supposed to serve, and you're not even one of them?
Transportation bond, because again, I think the mood of those in California, particularly here, are to figure out ways to pay for transportation projects. So good news is the newly elected Assembly member Nick Schultz introduced Assembly Bill 939 last week, which would place a $20 million transit bond on the November 3rd statewide ballot to fund sustainable transportation throughout California. It doesn't seem like that much, $20 million. Is it $20 billion?
Okay, see what I mean about numbers when they get to be so big they lose meaning? She doesn't even know.
Is it $20 billion? Okay, yeah, good. I was like, that wouldn't even do my groundbreaking at the Southeast Gateway.
We're in good hands, kids.